The wind came down from the mountains like something with teeth. Eli Mercer had lived through 17 Wyoming winters, and this one felt meaner than most. It wasn't just the cold, though the cold was vicious, the kind that turned spit to ice before it hit the ground. It was the silence. The way snow muffled everything until the world felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. He stood at the window of his cabin, watching the gray afternoon fade into something darker. Behind him, Sarah sat at the table, scratching at her slate with a piece of chalk worn down to a nub. She was 7 years old and too quiet for a child. That was his fault, he knew. Grief had a way of seeping into everything, turning a home into just a place where people slept and ate and waited for the next day to be the same as the one before. "Papa?" Sarah's voice was small. "Is she really coming today?" Eli didn't turn around. "Don't know. Storm might have delayed the stage." "But you said Christmas Eve. You said she'd be here for Christmas." I said maybe. That was a lie. He'd said it with more certainty than he'd felt about anything in 2 years, since Catherine died giving birth to a son who didn't survive the night either. He'd written that letter to the matrimonial agency in Boston 3 months ago, drunk on whiskey and loneliness, and when Margaret Hale's reply came, brief, formal, agreeable, he told himself it was practical. A solution. Sarah needed a mother. The ranch needed a woman's hand. He needed, well, it didn't matter what he needed. What mattered was that he'd sent money for the journey. What mattered was that the stage was due in town today, and if she was on it, he'd have to face what he'd done. "I hope she's nice," Sarah said, mostly to herself. "I hope she likes stories." Eli's jaw tightened. Catherine had told stories. She'd made up elaborate tales about the rabbits that lived in the scrub brush behind the cabin, gave them names and personalities and little adventures. Sarah would sit in her lap, completely still, like she was afraid the slightest movement would break the spell. Those evenings felt like something from someone else's life now. "Finish your numbers," Eli said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Then get the good plates down, clean them." "Are we really using the good plates?" "It's Christmas Eve, isn't it?" Sarah's face brightened in a way that made his chest ache. She slid off the chair and went to the shelf, standing on her toes to reach the plates they hadn't touched since the funeral. Eli watched her struggle for a moment before he crossed the room and lifted them down for her. They were covered in dust. "Careful," he said. "They were your mother's." Sarah nodded solemnly and carried them to the basin like they were made of glass and wishes. Eli shrugged into his coat. "I'm going to town. Be back before dark. Can I come?" "No." "But Papa—" I said no. He softened it with a hand on her head, brief and awkward. "Keep the fire going. Don't open the door for anyone." "Except her," Sarah said, her eyes bright. "I can open it for her, right?" Eli didn't answer. He pulled his hat down low and stepped out into the cold. The ride into town took 40 minutes, and every one of them gave him time to regret this. The horse's breath came out in clouds. The frozen ground rang under its hooves. Eli kept his head down against the wind and tried not to think about what he was riding toward. He described himself honestly in the letter, or mostly honestly. Widower, rancher, 1 daughter. Small operation, enough to get by. He needed someone practical, he'd written, someone who understood hard work, someone who wouldn't expect romance or softness, or any of the things he'd already used up on Catherine. Margaret Hale's response had been even more spare than his letter. She was a widow too. No children. She could cook, clean, sew, manage a household. She understood the arrangement was one of mutual benefit, not affection. She would arrive in Clearwater on December 24th if he sent the fare. He'd sent it the next day. Now, riding through the empty white landscape, he wondered what desperation looked like when it wrote a letter. He wondered if hers had looked like his. Clearwater wasn't much of a town. A main street, a general store, a saloon, a church at one end, and a livery at the other. In summer, it almost looked cheerful. In winter, it looked like what it was, a collection of buildings huddled together against the elements, occupied by people too stubborn or too poor to leave. Eli tied his horse outside the saloon and walked toward the stage office. A few men stood outside, stamping their feet against the cold, their breath forming a collective fog. He recognized most of them. Tom Driscoll, who ran cattle on the North Range. James Pritchard, the blacksmith. Young Sam Fletcher, whose father had died last spring and left him with a struggling farm and a mother who spent most of her time in bed. "Mercer!" Tom called out, grinning in that way he had that made everything seem like the setup for a joke. "Heard you got yourself a bride coming in. That true?" Word traveled fast in small towns. Eli nodded once, curt. "Well, hell," Tom said, slapping his knee. "Didn't think you had it in you. What's she like?" "Haven't met her." "Mail order?" James Pritchard raised his eyebrows. "That's a gamble." "Everything's a gamble," Eli said flatly. Sam Fletcher, who was barely 20 and still soft-faced despite a year of hard labor, looked uncomfortable. "My ma said it's practical. Said a man alone can't raise a daughter proper." "Your ma's right about that," Tom said. He was still grinning, but there was something mean in it now. "Of course, you get what you pay for with these arrangements. Hope you didn't send too much money, Mercer. Might end up with some worn-out widow looking for a meal ticket." Eli's hands curled into fists inside his pockets, but he kept his face blank. "Stage here yet?" "Running late," James said. "Storm slowed them down. Should be here within the hour, if it comes at all." Eli nodded and turned to walk away. "Hey, Mercer," Tom called after him. "Make sure you introduce us. I want to see what kind of woman says yes to a hard case like you." The laughter followed him down the street. "Boisseau?" He waited inside the stage office because the cold was too bitter to stand outside, and because he didn't want to give Tom Driscoll any more opportunities for commentary. The clerk, an older man named Wallace, sat behind a desk cluttered with ledgers and abandoned coffee cups. He glanced up when Eli entered, nodded a greeting, and went back to his papers. Eli stood by the window watching the street. The sun was already low, the light turning everything the color of steel. If the stage didn't come soon, he'd have to ride back in the dark. Sarah would be worried. She'd probably already set the table with those plates, imagined a whole evening that didn't involve just the two of them eating in silence. "You waiting on someone?" Wallace asked, though he clearly already knew. "The stage." "Expecting someone special?" Eli didn't answer. Wallace chuckled. "Small towns, Mercer. Everyone knows everyone's business. Heard you got a lady coming in from back east. That's right?" "Brave woman, traveling all this way in winter?" "Or desperate?" Wallace considered that. "Maybe both. Takes both kinds of courage, I suppose." The sound of harness bells cut through the quiet. Eli's stomach dropped. He moved to the window and saw the stage rolling down the main street, horses straining, the driver hunched against the cold. It looked like something out of a fever dream, covered in snow and ice, the wheels cutting dark lines through the white. "There she is," Wallace said unnecessarily. Eli's throat felt tight. He'd convinced himself she might not come, that the weather would turn her back or she'd change her mind, or the whole thing would dissolve into the same kind of half-real plan that never actually materialized into anything solid. But here it was, happening. The stage pulled to a stop outside. The driver climbed down, stiff and slow, and opened the door. Two passengers emerged, a traveling salesman Eli vaguely recognized, and then a woman. She wasn't what he'd expected. He'd imagined someone sturdy, practical, maybe not young, but not frail either. Someone who looked like they could handle a frontier winter without breaking. Margaret Hale looked like she'd already been broken several times and badly mended. She was thin, too thin, her dress hanging on her frame in a way that suggested it had once fit better. The fabric was patched in several places, the hem stained with road dirt. She carried a single carpet bag, worn at the corners. Her face was pale, sharp-featured, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of exhaustion or illness or both. Her hair, a dull brown streaked with premature gray, was pulled back in a severe bun. But it was her expression that stopped him. She looked around Clearwater with the careful blankness of someone who had learned not to expect much and was rarely disappointed. She saw the sign for the stage office and started toward it, moving slowly, like each step required a decision. Eli forced himself to move. He pushed open the door and stepped outside. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze moving over him with the same careful assessment he'd just given her. Up close, he could see the lines around her mouth, the chapped skin on her hands. She was probably younger than she looked. Poverty aged people faster than time did. "Mr. Mercer?" Her voice was quiet, Eastern in its vowels, steady despite the cold. "That's right. I'm Margaret Hale." They stood there, two strangers who'd agreed to bind their lives together based on a handful of exchanged letters, and neither seemed to know what came next. "I didn't think you'd come," Eli said, and immediately regretted it. It sounded like an accusation. Margaret's expression didn't change. "I gave my word." Behind her, Tom Driscoll and the others had wandered closer, curious and shameless about it. Eli could feel their eyes, could practically hear the thoughts forming. This was his bride? This worn-out woman who looked like a strong wind would knock her over? "You have other luggage?" he asked. "This is all." One bag. Everything she owned in the world fit in one bag. "Right." He gestured toward his horse. "It's about 40 minutes to the ranch. We should go before it gets full dark." Margaret nodded. She followed him to the horse, her breath shallow in the cold. When he mounted and reached down to help her up, her hand in his felt like bird bones wrapped in skin. She settled behind him, her bag clutched against her chest, and he could feel how she was shaking, whether from cold or fear or simple exhaustion, he didn't know. They rode out of town in silence. Behind them, Eli heard Tom Driscoll's laughter, sharp and cruel, carrying on the wind. "What?" The ride back was torture. Margaret didn't speak, just held on with a grip that weakened as they went. Twice Eli felt her slump forward, catching herself at the last moment. The temperature was dropping fast, the kind of cold that stopped being painful and started being dangerous. He urged the horse faster, but the frozen ground made speed risky. By the time the cabin came into view, lamplight glowing in the window, Margaret was barely conscious. He could feel her weight shifting, unsteady. "Almost there," he said, unsure if she could even hear him. He pulled the horse to a stop outside and dismounted, then reached up to help her down. She tried to climb down on her own and nearly fell. He caught her, and for a moment he was supporting all her weight. She felt like nothing, like if he let go, she might just blow away. The door burst open. Sarah stood there, backlit by firelight, her face bright with hope and excitement. "Is that her? Is that—" She stopped. Her expression shifted, confusion replacing joy. This wasn't the new mother she'd imagined. This was something else. Someone broken. Margaret steadied herself, pulled away from Eli's grip. She smoothed her dress with shaking hands and looked at Sarah with an attempt at a smile. "You must be Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your father told me about you." Sarah didn't move. She looked up at Eli, uncertain. Eli stood there, the cold biting at him, and felt something close to panic. This was wrong, all of it. He'd made a terrible mistake. This woman couldn't survive a Wyoming winter. She could barely survive the ride from town. What had he been thinking? What had she been thinking? He should send her back, first stage out. Give her money for a hotel in town tonight, for a ticket east. This wasn't going to work. Anyone could see that. But then he looked at Margaret. Really looked at her. She was swaying on her feet, exhausted beyond measure, clearly ill, possibly starving. And she was trying. She was trying to smile at his daughter, trying to make this work despite everything. And he thought about the letter she'd written, the careful, precise handwriting, the formal agreement to come west and marry a stranger. She'd known what she was walking into. She'd come anyway. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough, "go inside." "But inside now." Sarah's face crumpled. She turned and ran back into the cabin, leaving the door open. Eli and Margaret stood in the cold, facing each other. Her face was pale as snow, her lips faintly blue. She looked like she might collapse at any moment. "Mr. Mercer," she said carefully, "I understand if this isn't what you expected. I can—" She swayed, caught herself. "I can return to town? If you provide the fare, I'll—" "You're sick. I'm tired. The journey was long." "You're sick," he repeated, "and half-starved, unless I miss my guess." She lifted her chin, a flash of pride. "I can work. I'm stronger than I look." "You look like you're about to fall down. I won't be a burden, I promise you that." They stared at each other. The wind picked up, howling around the corners of the cabin. Inside, he could see Sarah standing by the fire, watching them through the window, her small face pressed against the glass. Every practical bone in his body told him to send her back. This arrangement was supposed to make his life easier, not harder. He needed help with the ranch, with Sarah, with 1,000 tasks that were slowly drowning him. He didn't need another person to take care of, another responsibility to shoulder. But the look on Sarah's face stopped him, not the hope. That had faded when she saw Margaret. It was something else, something that looked like recognition. His daughter knew what it felt like to be unwanted, to be too much trouble, to watch someone decide you weren't worth keeping. He couldn't do that to her again, not on Christmas Eve. "Come inside," he said. Margaret blinked. It's Christmas Eve. You're not spending it in a hotel in town, and you're sure as hell not traveling in this cold. Come inside. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." "Mr. Mercer?" "It's Eli, and I'm not asking." He picked up her carpet bag. "Come on before we both freeze to death out here." He walked toward the cabin without looking back to see if she followed. After a moment, he heard her footsteps behind him, slow and unsteady. Inside, the warmth hit like a wall. Sarah had built up the fire, and the cabin was almost stifling after the bitter cold outside. The good plates were set out on the table, carefully arranged. There was a pot of stew hanging over the fire, the smell of it filling the room. Margaret stopped just inside the door, taking it all in. Eli saw the cabin through her eyes, small, rough, the furniture homemade and showing its age. Nothing fancy, but clean, warm, solid. "Sarah," he said, "this is Margaret Hale. She's come a long way, and she needs to sit down before she falls down. Get her a chair." Sarah hesitated, then dragged one of the chairs closer to the fire. Margaret moved toward it like she was walking through water, each step deliberate. When she finally sat, her whole body seemed to sag with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. Sarah stood there, staring at her. "Are you really going to be my new ma?" Eli opened his mouth to say something, he didn't know what, but Margaret spoke first. "I don't know," she said honestly. "That's up to your father. And to you, I suppose. Do you like stories?" Margaret's lips quirked, almost a smile. "I used to read quite a bit. Before—" She stopped. "Yes, I like stories. My ma used to tell me stories. About rabbits." "That sounds lovely." Sarah moved a little closer. "You're really skinny." "Sarah," Eli said sharply. "It's all right," Margaret said. She looked at Sarah with something that might have been amusement. "You're right, I am. I haven't had much to eat lately." "Why not?" "Sarah, that's enough." But Margaret answered anyway. "Because food costs money, and I didn't have much money." "Oh," Sarah processed this. "We have stew. Papa made it. It's pretty good, except sometimes he forgets to add salt." "I'm sure it's wonderful." Eli moved to the pot, needing something to do with his hands. He ladled out a bowl and brought it to Margaret, along with a spoon and a piece of bread left over from yesterday. She took it with both hands, cradling it like it was precious. "Thank you," she said again. She ate slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned the hard way that eating too fast after going hungry could make you sick. Sarah watched her with open curiosity. Eli busied himself with the fire, with straightening things that didn't need straightening, with anything that kept him from having to think about what happened next. When Margaret had eaten about half the bowl, she set it down and looked up at him. "Mr. Mercer, Eli, I need you to understand something. I came here in good faith. I knew it was a practical arrangement. I wasn't looking for—" She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I can keep house, I can cook and clean and mend. I can teach Sarah her letters and numbers. I won't ask for anything beyond basic necessities. If that's acceptable to you, I'll stay and honor our agreement. If it's not, I'll leave without complaint. But I need to know which it is." Her voice was steady, but Eli could see the cost of that steadiness in the way her hands gripped the bowl, in the rigid set of her shoulders. She was terrified. She was just good at hiding it. He should have an answer. He should know what to say, but he didn't. "It's late," he said finally, "and you're exhausted. We'll talk about this in the morning." "I'd rather settle it now. And I'd rather not make decisions when we're both half frozen and too tired to think straight." He gestured toward the small room off the main cabin. That's Sarah's room. You can sleep there tonight. Sarah can sleep out here by the fire." "I can't take a child's bed." "You can for one night." He looked at Sarah. "Get your blankets." Sarah ran to obey, suddenly energized by having tasks to complete. She gathered her blankets and her rag doll and brought them out to the main room, making a nest near the hearth. Margaret watched her with an expression Eli couldn't quite read. "I'll show you," Sarah said, tugging at Margaret's sleeve. "Come on." Margaret let herself be led into the small room. Eli heard Sarah's voice, high and bright, explaining where things were. He stood by the fire, listening, trying to quiet the chaos in his head. This wasn't what he'd planned. None of it was what he'd planned. When Sarah came back out, Margaret following behind her, the older woman looked even more exhausted than before. She paused by the fire. "Thank you," she said to Eli, "for not sending me away tonight. I know I'm not what you expected." "You're not," he agreed. "But then, I probably wasn't what you expected either." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or recognition? "No, you weren't. Get some sleep. We'll figure the rest out tomorrow." She nodded and retreated into Sarah's room, closing the door behind her. Sarah looked up at Eli, her expression serious. "Is she going to stay?" "I don't know. I think she should. She seems sad, like she needs someone to be nice to her." Eli's throat tightened. His daughter had spent 2 years watching him drown in grief, and somehow she still had room in her heart to worry about a stranger. "Go to sleep," he said softly. "It's Christmas Eve." "I know. We were supposed to have a good Christmas this year. That's what you said." He had said that, back when he'd written that letter, back when he'd imagined this going differently. "We'll see," he said. "Now sleep." Sarah crawled into her makeshift bed by the fire, but Eli could tell she wouldn't sleep for a while. Her eyes were too bright, her mind too active. Eli sat in the chair by the table and stared at the door to Sarah's room. Behind it, a stranger was sleeping in his daughter's bed, a woman he'd agreed to marry based on a handful of letters and his own desperate loneliness. Tomorrow he'd have to decide what to do. Tonight, he just had to get through the rest of Christmas Eve without making things worse. Outside, the wind howled, the fire crackled. Sarah's breathing eventually evened out into sleep. And in the small room behind the closed door, Margaret Hale lay in a borrowed bed in a stranger's house, and Eli wondered if she was crying or simply too exhausted to manage even that. He sat there until the fire burned low, adding logs when it needed them, watching the shadows dance on the walls, and tried to convince himself he hadn't just made the worst mistake of his life. Eli woke before dawn to the sound of movement in the cabin. For a disoriented moment, he thought it was Catherine, his body remembering her morning routine before his mind caught up with the present. Then he smelled coffee, strong and bitter, and remembered. Margaret. He sat up on the floor where he'd eventually collapsed sometime after midnight, his back protesting. Through the dim pre-dawn light, he could see her silhouette moving near the stove, quiet and efficient. Sarah was still asleep by the fire, curled around her rag doll. "You're up early," he said, his voice rough. Margaret startled, nearly dropping the pot she was holding. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." He stood, wincing as his spine cracked. "You should have slept longer. You were exhausted." "I'm used to early mornings." She poured coffee into 2 cups, her hands steadier than they'd been last night. "I hope you don't mind. I found the beans." He took the cup she offered, studying her in the growing light. She looked slightly less terrible than she had yesterday. Still too thin, still worn, but her eyes were clearer. She'd changed her dress for one that was only marginally less patched, and she'd attempted to tame her hair, though strands of it kept escaping the bun. "Sleep at all?" he asked. "Some." She wrapped her hands around her own cup, seeking the warmth. The bed was comfortable, more comfortable than... She stopped herself. "Thank you for that." They stood in awkward silence, 2 strangers pretending to be something more, neither quite sure what to say next. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, turning the snow-covered landscape from black to gray. "Listen," Eli started, then stopped. He'd rehearsed this conversation in his head half the night. It should be simple, practical. They'd made an arrangement that clearly wasn't going to work. The decent thing was to acknowledge that, give her money for a ticket back east, and part ways with minimal damage done. But Sarah chose that moment to wake up. She sat up, blinking, her hair a wild tangle. When she saw Margaret standing there, real and solid in the morning light, her face brightened. "You're still here," she said, like she'd expected Margaret to vanish in the night. "I'm still here," Margaret confirmed softly. "It's Christmas." Sarah scrambled to her feet. "Papa, it's Christmas morning." Eli had forgotten. In the chaos of yesterday, Christmas had become just another problem to navigate. But Sarah was looking at him with those bright eyes, and he realized she'd been holding on to this. The promise of something different, something better than the gray sameness of the past 2 years. So it is, he managed. Sarah looked between them, her excitement dimming slightly as she registered the tension. Are we going to have breakfast? Special breakfast, like Ma used to make. Margaret set down her cup. What did your mother make? Johnny cakes, with butter and syrup. Sarah's voice went wistful. Papa tries, but they always come out wrong. I can make Johnny cakes, Margaret said. She glanced at Eli. If that's all right. He should say no. He should have that conversation now, before Sarah got more attached, before this got more complicated. But his daughter was looking at Margaret with something like hope, and he found himself nodding. I'll show you where everything is, Sarah said, grabbing Margaret's hand and pulling her toward the shelves. Eli watched them, coffee going cold in his hands. Margaret listened patiently as Sarah chattered, pointing out the cornmeal, the molasses, the pan that worked best. She moved carefully around the small kitchen, taking in its organization, learning its rhythms. When she started mixing the batter, her movements had a practiced efficiency that spoke of years spent in kitchens much finer than this one. You were in service, Eli said. It wasn't a question. Margaret's hands paused, just for a moment. Yes, before I married. And after? After my husband had a small shop, dry goods. When he died, his debts exceeded the value of the inventory. Her voice was matter-of-fact, as though she were reciting someone else's story. I worked where I could, but positions are scarce and I'm not young anymore. Sarah, oblivious to the weight of this confession, was setting out plates, the good plates from last night, still on the table. How old are you? Sarah, Eli warned. It's all right, Margaret said. I'm 34. How old are you? 7, almost 8. Almost 8 is very grown up, Sarah beamed. She watched Margaret pour the first cake onto the hot griddle, the batter sizzling. You're good at this. I've had practice. The Johnny cakes were perfect, golden brown, tender, better than anything Eli had managed in 2 years of trying. Sarah ate hers with such enthusiasm that Margaret smiled, a real smile that transformed her severe features into something almost pretty. Can you make other things? Sarah asked through a mouthful of cake. Sarah, manners. She swallowed. Sorry, can you? I can make quite a few things, Margaret said. What would you like to learn? Everything. That smile again, brief but genuine. That's a tall order. They ate in a silence that was less awkward than before, though Eli could feel the unspoken conversation hanging in the air between him and Margaret. After breakfast, Sarah insisted on showing Margaret around the cabin, pointing out her small collection of treasures. A bird's nest she'd found last spring, a smooth stone from the creek, a carved wooden horse Eli had made her last Christmas. Papa made it, Sarah explained, holding up the horse. He's good at carving. He made all our spoons, too. Margaret examined the horse, turning it over in her hands. It's beautiful work. Eli, uncomfortable with the praise, stood. I need to check the stock. Sarah, you stay inside where it's warm. Can Margaret come with you? Sarah asked. Can she see the animals? It's too cold. I don't mind the cold, Margaret interrupted. She looked at him directly. And I think we need to talk. She was right. They did. Putting it off would only make things worse. Get your coat, he said. Outside, the world was white and still. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape so bright it hurt to look at. Eli's breath clouded in the air as he led Margaret toward the small barn where he kept his 2 horses, a milk cow, and a handful of chickens. It's not much, he said, opening the barn door. But it's enough. Margaret stepped inside, looking around at the modest operation. The animals were well kept, the space clean. She ran a hand along one of the stall doors, thoughtful. You do this alone? Mostly. I hire help for branding, for moving cattle. But the day-to-day, yeah, just me. And Sarah. She's 7. She could do more than you let her. He bristled at that. You've been here 12 hours and you think you know what my daughter needs? Margaret met his gaze without flinching. I think she needs to feel useful. Children do better when they have purpose. She's a child. She should be playing, not... She should be both. But right now, she's neither. She's watching, waiting, trying to figure out what's expected of her. The accuracy of that observation stung. Eli turned away, grabbing a pitchfork to muck out the nearest stall. You wanted to talk, so talk. Margaret was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. I know you're going to send me back. He didn't deny it. I understand why, she continued. I'm not what you needed. I can see that. But I want you to know, I would have tried. I would have worked harder than anyone you could have found. I would have... Her voice cracked just slightly. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger when I arrived. I'm sorry I embarrassed you. Eli stopped working. Embarrassed me? Those men in town, they were laughing at you for choosing someone like me. Those men are fools. Perhaps, but they weren't wrong. She wrapped her arms around herself, though the barn was warmer than outside. I've spent the past 6 months sleeping in a boarding house that rented beds by the shift, eating 1 meal a day if I was lucky. When your letter came, when you sent the money for fare, I used half of it to settle my debts and spent the other half on the journey. I arrived here with 17 cents in my pocket and the clothes on my back. She laughed, a bitter sound. So yes, I look like exactly what I am, someone who had nowhere else to go. The honesty of it hit him like a fist to the chest. He'd spent last night thinking about his own disappointment, his own problems. He hadn't stopped to consider what desperation looked like from the other side. I wasn't laughing, he said quietly. I know. You were horrified. I was surprised. There's a difference. Is there? She looked at him, and he saw the pride there, battered but not quite broken. Tell me honestly, if you'd seen me before you sent the money, would you still have asked me to come? He wanted to lie, but she'd been honest with him, painfully so. I don't know, he said. She nodded, like that was the answer she'd expected. Then send me back. Give me the fare to Boston, and I'll go. But please, don't tell Sarah it's because I wasn't good enough. Tell her something else. Tell her I was homesick, or that I missed the city, or anything except the truth. Why do you care what Sarah thinks? Because she's a little girl who's already lost too much. She doesn't need to learn that people can be disposable. Eli set down the pitchfork. He looked at this woman, this stranger who'd walked into his life less than a day ago, and tried to reconcile what he was seeing with what he'd expected. She was proud and prickly and uncomfortably perceptive. She was also right about Sarah. The arrangement we discussed in our letters, he said slowly. That's still what you want? Practical. No expectations of anything else. Margaret's expression became guarded. Yes. You'd really stay here, knowing what you know now? It's hard work, lonely. The winters are brutal, the town is small, and people talk. Mr. Mercer, Eli, I've spent the past 6 months washing other people's undergarments in a laundry that was so hot I fainted twice. Before that, I worked in a factory that cost me the hearing in my left ear. She gestured at the barn, at the snow-covered ranch beyond. This is not the hardship you think it is. You'd be married to a man you don't love. And you'd be married to a woman you don't love. That was the agreement. He studied her. What happened to you before all this? Does it matter? Might. She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant. I was born into a good family. Not wealthy, but comfortable. I was educated, accomplished. I thought I understood how the world worked. She paused. I married a man my father approved of. He was charming, well-connected. 6 months after the wedding, I discovered he gambled. Badly. He lost everything. His business, our home, every cent we had. Then he caught pneumonia and died, leaving me with debts I couldn't pay and a reputation ruined by association. Your family? Wanted nothing to do with the scandal. I tried to find work, but women like me, women with education, but no references, no connections, we fall through the cracks. We become invisible. She met his eyes. So when I saw your advertisement, I didn't see a risk. I saw a chance to stop falling. Eli absorbed this. In her letters, she'd been brief, formal. He'd assumed that meant she was cold, practical to the point of being unfeeling. He hadn't considered that it might be the opposite, that she'd learned to protect herself by revealing as little as possible. If you stay, he said carefully, there are things you need to understand. I can't be what my wife was. Catherine, she was warm, open, good with people. I'm none of those things. I'm not asking you to be. And I can't promise I'll ever feel more for you than respect. Maybe not even that, at first. I'm not asking for that either. Then what are you asking for? She looked at him directly. A roof, food, safety, the chance to be useful again. that's all. It should have been simple, a straightforward transaction. But something in the way she said it, the careful lowering of expectations, the practiced management of hope, made his chest ache. You can cook? He asked. Yes. Sew? Mend? Yes. Handle the chickens? The garden? Come spring? I can learn. He nodded slowly. Then stay. Through the winter, at least. We'll see how it goes. If it doesn't work, I'll get you a ticket east come spring, with enough money to get settled somewhere. Fair? Margaret's eyes widened slightly. You do that? Even if it doesn't work out? I'm not a monster. I'm not going to leave you stranded. For the first time since she'd arrived, her careful composure cracked. Her eyes went bright with tears she didn't let fall. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. You haven't survived a full winter here. The ghost of a smile. I've survived worse. They stood there at the barn, the animals shifting and breathing around them, and Eli had the unsettling feeling that he'd just made another decision he couldn't take back. But Sarah's face flashed in his mind, the hope there, the hunger for something beyond their quiet grief. And he knew he couldn't have chosen differently. Come on, he said. Sarah's probably got her nose pressed to the window wondering what we're doing out here. They walked back to the cabin together. Inside, Sarah was indeed at the window, and when she saw them approaching, her whole face lit up. Is she staying? She asked the moment they came through the door. Please say she's staying. Eli looked at Margaret, who looked back at him. Some silent agreement passed between them. She's staying, Eli said. Through the winter, anyway. Sarah let out a whoop and threw her arms around Margaret's waist. Margaret froze, clearly unused to such displays, then slowly, carefully, put her hands on Sarah's shoulders. I'm glad you're staying, Sarah said, her voice muffled against Margaret's dress. I'll help you. I'll show you everything. You won't be sorry. Margaret's expression was complicated, relief and fear and something that might have been longing. I'll do my best, she said quietly. The rest of Christmas Day passed in a strange new rhythm. Margaret moved through the cabin like she was learning a dance, watching where Eli kept things, how he organized his space. She didn't try to take over, just observed, asked quiet questions, made herself useful in small ways. She found the mending basket, untouched for months, and began working through it while Sarah sat beside her, chattering about everything and nothing. She noticed the wood supply was running low and, despite Eli's protests, helped him bring in more from the shed. She cooked dinner, venison stew with herbs she'd found in the pantry, biscuits that were only slightly burnt, and the cabin filled with smells that reminded Eli of something he'd lost. Sarah was in heaven. She followed Margaret everywhere, talking constantly, showing her treasures, asking questions, and Margaret, patient in a way Eli hadn't expected, answered them all. Where did you live before? Boston. What's Boston like? Crowded, noisy, full of buildings taller than trees. Did you like it? A pause. Parts of it. Do you miss it? Not as much as I thought I would. As evening fell and Sarah finally wound down, curling up by the fire with her rag doll, Eli found himself watching Margaret. She was mending one of his shirts, her needle moving with practiced precision. In the firelight, she looked less severe. Still thin, still worn, but somehow more solid than she had yesterday, like she was becoming real. She'll wear you out, he said. The questions. Margaret smiled slightly. I don't mind. It's nice to be listened to. When's the last time someone asked you questions like that? Like they cared about the answers? She thought about it. I can't remember. That hit him harder than it should have. He tried to imagine 6 months of sleeping in a rented bed, working until you fainted, eating one meal a day. Tried to imagine becoming invisible, forgotten. He couldn't. Tomorrow, he said, we'll need to work on the wood supply. There's more cutting to be done before the next storm hits. I can help with that. You know how to use an axe? I can learn. It's hard work. I'm not afraid of hard work. He believed her. Whatever else she might be, she wasn't afraid of that. Sarah's breathing evened out into sleep. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The fire crackled and popped. In the small, warm circle of lamplight, Eli and Margaret sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Can I ask you something? Margaret said finally. Go ahead. Your wife, how did she die? He should have expected the question. Still, it took him a moment to answer. Childbirth. The baby, a boy. He didn't make it either. I'm sorry. It was 2 years ago. That doesn't make it hurt less. No, it didn't. He looked at her. You loved your husband? Even after what he did? I thought I did. Looking back, I'm not sure I knew what love was. I knew duty, obligation, the appearance of a good marriage. She set down her mending. He wasn't cruel, just weak and selfish. By the time I understood that, it was too late. Regret it? Marrying him? Every day. But regret doesn't change anything, does it? No, it doesn't. They lapsed into silence again. But it was different now. Less awkward, more companionable. The silence of two people who'd both made mistakes and were trying to figure out how to move forward. Eventually, Margaret stood. I should sleep. Tomorrow will be another long day. Take the bed again. Sarah's fine out here. I can't keep taking her room. We'll figure something else out soon. For now, take it. She nodded and moved toward the door, then paused. Eli? Yeah? Thank you. For giving me a chance. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. After she'd gone, he sat by the fire and tried to quiet his mind. He told her to stay. He'd agreed to let this strange, proud, broken woman into his home, into his life, into Sarah's life. It might be a mistake. It probably was a mistake. But watching Sarah sleep, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been in months, he thought maybe some mistakes were worth making. The days that followed settled into a pattern. Margaret rose before dawn, had coffee ready when Eli woke. She cooked breakfast while he did the morning chores, and by the time he came back inside, the cabin was warm and there was food on the table. She worked through the day, mending, cleaning, organizing, teaching Sarah her letters. She didn't complain about the cold, or the isolation, or the endless work. She just did it. Eli watched her, waiting for the moment when she'd break, when the reality of frontier life would overwhelm her. It didn't come. Instead, she learned how to manage the stove so it held heat through the night, how to stretch their supplies when the weather kept them from town, how to read Eli's moods and know when to talk and when to leave him alone. Sarah bloomed under her attention. The quiet, watchful child began to laugh again, to ask questions, to believe that maybe this new person wouldn't disappear like her mother had. But Eli kept his distance. He was polite, civil, but careful not to let Margaret get too close. She was here to help with the ranch, to care for Sarah. That was the arrangement. Nothing more. He told himself that was enough. He told himself he didn't notice the way she hummed while she worked, or how her hands never stayed idle, or the careful way she arranged wildflowers she found dried in a drawer, like even small, beautiful things deserved attention. He told himself it didn't matter that she'd started to look healthier, color returning to her cheeks, her movements less fragile, that her rare smiles were becoming slightly less rare. 3 weeks passed like this. 3 weeks of careful coexistence, of two people learning to share space without touching. Then the town's winter social came around. Sarah heard about it from one of the neighboring ranch children and came home breathless with excitement. Papa, there's a dance in 2 weeks. Can we go? Please. Eli's first instinct was to say no. He hated those gatherings, the forced cheerfulness, the gossip, the way everyone pretended to be friendlier than they were. But Sarah was looking at him with those bright eyes, and he couldn't remember the last time she'd been excited about something. We'll see, he said. That means yes. Sarah spun around. Margaret, did you hear? There's a dance. Margaret, who was peeling potatoes at the table, looked uncertain. I'm sure you and your father will have a lovely time. You have to come too. I don't think you have to. Everyone comes, even old Mr. Patterson, and he hates everybody. Margaret glanced at Eli, clearly looking for an out. He should give her one. The thought of walking into town with Margaret on his arm, facing Tom Driscoll and the others who'd laughed at them, made his jaw clench. But Sarah was already planning what dress she'd wear, what songs they might dance to, and he couldn't take that away from her. Margaret should come, he heard himself say. If she wants to. Margaret's eyes widened slightly. I don't have anything appropriate to wear. Nobody does, Eli said. It's not that kind of dance. I really don't think, Please, Sarah begged, grabbing Margaret's hand. Please come. It won't be fun without you. Margaret looked trapped. Eli almost felt sorry for her. All right, she said finally. I'll come. Sarah cheered. Eli wondered what he'd just set in motion. The 2 weeks passed quickly. Sarah talked of nothing but the dance. Margaret grew quieter, more withdrawn. Eli pretended not to notice. The night before the social, after Sarah had gone to bed, Margaret approached him. I need to tell you something, she said. He looked up from the harness he was mending. What's wrong? I can't dance. He blinked. What? I never learned. My husband, he didn't like social gatherings. We never went to dances. She twisted her hands together. I don't want to embarrass you. You won't. You don't know that. Margaret, it's a frontier dance. Half the men are too drunk to stand up straight, and the other half are standing on their partner's feet. Nobody's going to care if you don't know the steps. She didn't look convinced. On impulse, he stood. Come here. What? Come here. I'll show you the basics. She stared at him like he'd suggested they go swimming in the creek. It's not hard, he said. Just a simple waltz. That's all anyone does at these things, anyway. Slowly, hesitantly, she crossed the room. He took her right hand in his left, put his other hand at her waist. She was stiff as a board, her face flushed. Relax, he said. I can't. Try. He hummed a simple melody and began to move, guiding her through the basic steps. She stumbled immediately, stepping on his foot. Sorry, she gasped. It's fine. Try again. They moved around the small cabin, clumsy and awkward. She was concentrating so hard he could practically hear her thinking. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Don't think so much, he said. Just follow. I'm trying. I know. Gradually, painfully, she began to get it. Her movements smoothed out. She stopped watching her feet and looked up at him instead. And for just a moment, they were actually dancing. Then she seemed to realize how close they were standing, how his hand felt at her waist, and she pulled away. That's enough, she said, her voice strained. I think I understand now. Margaret, thank you for the lesson. I'm going to bed. She fled to Sarah's room, leaving Eli standing alone in the middle of the cabin, his hands still positioned for a dance partner who was no longer there. He stood there for a long time, trying to ignore the way his heart was beating harder than it should have been, trying to convince himself that teaching her to dance was just practical. Just another part of the arrangement, nothing more. The morning of the dance, Eli woke with a knot in his stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. Sarah was already up, practically vibrating with excitement as she helped Margaret prepare breakfast. The girl had talked of nothing else for 2 weeks, and now the day was finally here. Eli watched them move around the kitchen, Sarah chattering, Margaret listening with that patient attention she'd developed, and wished he could share even a fraction of his daughter's enthusiasm. He knew what waited for them in town. Tom Driscoll's smirking face, the whispers, the judging eyes that would take in Margaret's patched dress and worn shoes and find him wanting for choosing her. Papa, what time are we leaving? Sarah asked for the 3rd time that morning. When the chores are done, he said. Same as I told you 5 minutes ago. But that could be any time. Then I guess you better help me finish faster. Sarah grabbed her coat with such speed that Margaret actually laughed, a sound that still caught Eli off guard when he heard it. She didn't laugh often, but when she did, it changed her whole face. He pushed the thought away and headed outside. The day was cold but clear, the kind of winter afternoon that made the snow sparkle like crushed glass. Eli worked through his tasks with mechanical efficiency, trying not to think about the evening ahead. Sarah helped where she could, mostly getting in the way, but he didn't have the heart to send her inside. When he came back in to clean up, Margaret was in Sarah's room with the door half closed. He could hear their voices, low and conspiratorial. Hold still, Margaret was saying. I'm almost done. Does it look nice? It looks lovely. Are you sure? I want to look grown up. You look perfect. But Sarah, Margaret's voice softened. You know you don't have to look a certain way for people to value you, right? But it helps. There was a pause. Yes, Margaret admitted quietly. Sometimes it does, but the people whose opinions matter won't care what dress you're wearing. Will people be mean to you because of your dress? Another pause, longer this time. Possibly. That's stupid. Yes, it is. But people are often stupid about things that don't matter. If anyone's mean to you, I'll tell them off. Eli heard the smile in Margaret's voice. I appreciate that, but I can handle it. Papa will too. He won't let anyone be mean. Will he? Eli thought. He wanted to believe that was true, but he wasn't sure. Part of him, the part that still cared what Tom Driscoll thought, what the whole town thought, wanted to keep his head down and get through the evening without incident. He knocked on the doorframe. You two about ready? Sarah burst out, spinning to show off her Sunday dress. The blue one Catherine had made her, let out twice now, but still fitting. Margaret had done something with her hair, braiding it in a way that made her look older. Do I look nice? Sarah demanded. You look fine, Eli said, which earned him an eye roll. That's what you always say. Because it's always true. Margaret emerged from the room more slowly. She'd changed into her other dress, the one that was slightly less patched, though not by much. She'd tried to do something with her hair, pinning it up in a style that was probably fashionable 5 years ago in Boston. It didn't quite work with her worn features, but she'd made an effort. You ready? He asked. She met his eyes. As I'll ever be. The ride into town was quiet. Sarah filled the silence with chatter, but Eli and Margaret barely spoke. He could feel her tension, the way she held herself rigid in the wagon beside him. He wanted to say something reassuring, but he didn't know what. He couldn't promise people would be kind. He couldn't even promise he'd defend her if they weren't. The thought made him feel small. Clearwater's community hall was already full of people when they arrived. Lanterns hung from the rafters. Fiddles were being tuned in the corner, and the smell of mulled cider and someone's burnt pie filled the air. Sarah jumped down from the wagon before it fully stopped, running toward a group of children her age. Sarah, wait! But she was already gone, swallowed up by the crowd. Eli helped Margaret down. Her hand in his was cold even through her gloves. We don't have to stay long, he said. Sarah will want to stay. Then we'll stay. They walked toward the hall. Every step felt like a mistake. Eli could already see heads turning, people noticing them, noticing Margaret. Tom Driscoll was standing near the door with James Pritchard and a few others. His grin widened when he saw them approaching. Well, well, he called out. Mercer finally brought his bride to meet the neighbors. Eli's jaw clenched, but he kept walking. Evening, Mrs. Mercer, Tom continued, his voice dripping with false courtesy. Welcome to Clearwater. We've all been curious to meet you. Margaret's chin lifted slightly. Mr. Driscoll? How are you finding frontier life? Must be quite different from back east. It is, but I'm managing. I'm sure you are. Tom's eyes traveled over her dress, her worn shoes. Must be nice, having a roof over your head. Steady meals. The implication was clear. She was here because she had nowhere else to go, because Eli was desperate enough to take anyone. Tom, James Pritchard said quietly, a warning, but Tom wasn't done. No offense intended, of course, just making conversation. It's what neighbors do. Of course, Margaret said, her voice carefully neutral. If you'll excuse us. She moved past them into the hall, her spine straight. Eli followed, his hands curled into fists. Inside, more eyes turned their way. Women clustered in groups, their whispers barely concealed. Men looked Margaret over with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Eli felt their judgment like a physical weight. I need some air, Margaret said suddenly. We just got here. I know. I need a moment. She walked toward the side door before he could respond. Eli stood there, caught between following her and staying to find Sarah. He chose Sarah, scanning the crowd until he spotted her laughing with the other children, oblivious to the undercurrent swirling around them. That's her? A woman's voice, sharp with curiosity. Eli turned to find Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, studying him with shrewd eyes. Your mail-order bride? Her name is Margaret. Yes, I'm sure it is. Mrs. Patterson sniffed. She looks rather delicate for ranch life. She's stronger than she looks. I'm sure you'd like to think so. The woman's smile was thin. My husband mentioned she arrived with nothing, quite literally nothing but the clothes on her back. What she arrived with is none of your concern. Oh, I'm not judging. It's just unusual, that's all. Most women, even mail-order brides, have at least some belongings. Makes one wonder what circumstances she was fleeing. Eli's temper flared. She wasn't fleeing anything. She was widowed and down on her luck, that's all. Of course, I'm sure that's the whole story. Mrs. Patterson patted his arm with false sympathy. You're doing a charitable thing taking her in. Very Christian of you. She walked away before Eli could respond. He stood there, anger simmering in his chest. This was exactly what he'd known would happen. Exactly why he'd hesitated at the door that first night. Margaret had been right. She was an embarrassment to him. The thought made him angrier, at the town, at himself, at the whole situation. He found Margaret outside, standing in the cold without her coat, her arms wrapped around herself. She was staring at nothing, her breath coming out in clouds. You'll freeze, he said. She didn't turn around. I should go back to the ranch. Sarah will be disappointed. Sarah will survive. Will you? That made her turn. Her eyes were bright, but whether from cold or tears, he couldn't tell. I knew this would happen. I told myself it wouldn't matter what they thought, but it does. It matters. What they think isn't important, isn't it? You're the one who has to live here, work with these people, do business in this town, and every time they see me, they're going to think you settled for less than you deserved. I don't care what they think. Yes, you do. Her voice was sharp now. I saw your face when Tom Driscoll looked at me. You were ashamed. I was angry. At him or at me? Eli opened his mouth to deny it, but the word stuck in his throat, because there was a kernel of truth there, and she knew it. He had felt something when Tom looked at Margaret that way. Not quite shame, but something close to it. Frustration, maybe. Resentment that this arrangement he'd made for practical reasons was turning into a public humiliation. I should never have come here, Margaret said quietly. I should have known better than to think this could work. You've been working just fine for 3 weeks. At the ranch, yes, where no one can see. But this? She gestured at the hall behind them. This is different. You can't hide me at the ranch forever. I'm not trying to hide you. Aren't you? She laughed, bitter. You barely look at me. You haven't touched me since that dance lesson. You eat dinner in silence and leave the room when I enter. That's not a partnership, Eli. That's tolerance. And I don't need to travel 1,000 miles to be tolerated. What do you want from me? I don't know. The outburst seemed to surprise her as much as him. She pressed her hands to her face. I don't know what I want. I thought I just needed security, a place to be. But standing in there, seeing how they look at me, at you, I realized I want more than that. I want... She dropped her hands. It doesn't matter what I want. Tell me anyway. Why? So you can tell me I'm asking for too much? That I should be grateful for what I have? Because I'm trying to understand. She studied him for a long moment. I want to matter, not as a housekeeper or a solution to your problems, as a person. I want someone to look at me and see something besides poverty or desperation or a mistake. Her voice cracked. I want to stop feeling invisible. The raw honesty of it hit him like a punch. He'd spent 3 weeks keeping her at arm's length, treating her like hired help, convincing himself that was the arrangement they'd agreed to. But she was right. She'd become invisible to him. A figure moving through his house, useful but unacknowledged. Just like she'd been invisible to everyone else who'd looked past her when she was sleeping in boarding houses and fainting in laundries. I see you, he said, and was surprised to find it was true. He'd been trying not to see her, but he did. He saw her patience with Sarah, her quiet competence, her pride that wouldn't quite break no matter how hard life pushed. He saw her. Do you, or do you just see someone convenient? Before he could answer, Sarah burst through the door. Papa, Margaret, they're starting the dancing, come on! She grabbed both their hands, pulling them back inside. The moment was broken, the conversation left hanging in the cold air. The hall had transformed. Couples were forming up for the first dance. The fiddler was calling instructions. Sarah dragged them toward the floor, her face bright with excitement. Dance with Margaret first, she instructed Eli. I want to watch. Sarah, please? Eli looked at Margaret. She looked trapped, uncertain. Every eye in the hall was on them. He could refuse, make an excuse, spare them both the scrutiny. But he thought about what she'd said, about being invisible, about wanting to matter. He held out his hand. Margaret stared at it like it might bite her. Then, slowly, she placed her hand in his. They moved onto the floor. Eli could feel the weight of every gaze, could practically hear the whispers. He put his hand at Margaret's waist, the same position as that night in the cabin, but different somehow. More public, more real. The music started. They began to move. Margaret was stiff at first, counting steps in her head like she had during the lesson, but gradually she relaxed into it. Her feet found the rhythm. Her hand tightened on his shoulder. "You're doing fine," he murmured. "Everyone's watching." "Let them watch." They turned and he caught Tom Driscoll's face in the crowd. The man was still smirking, leaning close to whisper something to his wife. Whatever he said made her laugh. Eli's grip on Margaret's waist tightened. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was Tom's casual cruelty. It was Mrs. Patterson's thinly veiled contempt. It was the way people looked at Margaret like she was something to be pitied or mocked. It was the way Eli had let it happen, had even participated in it, in his own way, by keeping her at a distance. The dance ended. Polite applause rippled through the hall. Eli and Margaret separated, and he saw the relief on her face. Relief that it was over, that she could fade back into invisibility. "That was beautiful." Sarah bounced over to them. "You looked so nice together. Can I dance now?" "Go ahead," Eli said. Sarah ran off to join the other children for a simpler dance. Margaret moved toward the edge of the room, clearly intending to disappear into the shadows. Eli started to follow her, then stopped. Tom Driscoll was approaching, his wife at his side. "Nice dancing, Mercer," Tom said. "You're a better man than me, I'll give you that." "How's that?" "I couldn't do it. Pretend that everything's fine when the whole town knows you got desperate and bought yourself a wife who was even more desperate than you were." Eli's hands curled into fists. "Careful, Tom. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. She's a charity case, and you—" He laughed. "You're stuck with her now, aren't you? Can't exactly send her back without looking like even more of a fool." Something snapped inside Eli. 2 years of grief, 3 weeks of confusion, all the anger he'd been swallowing since Catherine died. It all came rushing up. "You want to say that again?" His voice was low, dangerous. Tom's grin faltered. You're just running your mouth like always, saying things about people you don't know, making judgments you've got no right to make." "Everyone's thinking it, then everyone's wrong." Eli stepped closer. "You look at Margaret and see someone who had nothing. I look at her and see someone who worked herself sick trying to survive, who traveled 1,000 miles in winter to honor an agreement with a stranger, who's been nothing but kind to my daughter despite having every reason to be bitter about how life treated her. So yeah, maybe she's not what I expected. But she's a damn sight better than she should be after what she's been through. And she's worth 10 of you." The words came out before he'd fully thought them through, but once they were out, he realized they were true. All of it. Tom's face darkened. "You're making a scene." "Good. Let everyone hear. Margaret's my wife. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." The hall had gone quiet. Everyone was staring now. Eli didn't care. He turned and walked away, leaving Tom standing there with his mouth open. He found Margaret near the door, her face pale. "Did you mean that?" she whispered. "Every word." "Eli, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did." He took her hand right there in front of everyone. "I've been a coward, worried about what people think instead of doing what's right. But I'm done with that." "You'll make enemies." "I've got a few already. What's a few more?" The fiddler, sensing the tension, started up a new tune. Couples slowly began to move back onto the floor, though the whispers continued. Margaret looked up at Eli, her eyes searching his face. "Why now? Why defend me now and not before?" "Because I finally heard what you were saying, about being invisible, about wanting to matter." He squeezed her hand. "You matter, Margaret. You matter to Sarah. And you matter to me." He saw her eyes go bright with tears she refused to let fall. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." They stood there, hands joined, while the rest of the hall tried to pretend they weren't watching. Sarah came running over, her face glowing. "Papa, you told off Mr. Driscoll. I heard you. You said Margaret was worth 10 of him." "Sarah, lower your voice." "But it was so good. His face got all red and everything." Despite everything, Eli felt his lips twitch. "Go dance. We'll leave soon." "Can we stay a little longer, please?" He looked at Margaret. She nodded, a small smile on her face. "A little longer," he agreed. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Some people avoided them. Others approached with cautious friendliness, as if Eli's defense of Margaret had given them permission to see her differently. Mrs. Fletcher, Sam's mother, even invited them to Sunday dinner. But the damage was done. Eli could feel it. He'd drawn a line, and Tom Driscoll wasn't the type to forgive public humiliation. There would be consequences. There always were in small towns. He didn't care. They left when Sarah finally wore herself out. She fell asleep in the wagon almost immediately, her head pillowed on Margaret's lap. Eli drove through the dark, hyper-aware of Margaret sitting beside him. "That was either very brave or very stupid," she said finally. "Probably both. You'll regret it. When Tom starts spreading stories, when people take his side, let them." She was quiet for a moment. "I never asked you to fight my battles." "I know. But they're my battles too. You're my wife." "Am I? We've never even—" She stopped, flustered. The arrangement was supposed to be practical. "Maybe I'm tired of practical." He felt her gaze on him but kept his eyes on the road. His heart was beating too hard. He'd said too much, revealed too much, but he couldn't take it back now. Didn't want to. "What are you saying?" Margaret asked quietly. "I'm saying I've been keeping you at a distance because I was afraid. Afraid of feeling something for someone again. Afraid of losing someone again. But watching you tonight, seeing how hard you tried to hold yourself together while people judged you, I realized being afraid is worse than the risk. Eli, I'm not saying I love you. I don't know you well enough for that. But I want to. I want to know you. Not as someone convenient, as my wife. Really, my wife." The wagon rolled on through the darkness. Sarah slept on, oblivious. Margaret said nothing for so long that Eli began to think he'd made a terrible mistake. Then she reached over and put her hand on his arm. "I want that too," she whispered. They didn't speak again until they reached the ranch. Eli carried Sarah inside while Margaret lit the lamps. They put the girl to bed together, a routine they'd developed over the past weeks. But tonight it felt different, charged with possibility. After Sarah was settled, they stood in the main room, suddenly awkward with each other again. "I should—" Margaret gestured toward Sarah's room. "Wait." Eli crossed to the trunk in the corner, the one that held Catherine's things. He'd locked it 2 years ago and hadn't opened it since. His hands shook as he worked the latch. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was the ring. His mother's ring, the one he'd given to Catherine. He'd taken it off her cold finger after she died and couldn't bear to look at it again. He pulled it out, the simple gold band catching the lamplight. "This was my mother's," he said. "Then it was Catherine's. I want you to have it." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "I can't. That's too much." "It's not enough. But it's a start." He held it out. "You don't have to wear it if you don't want to. But I want you to know you're not just convenient. You're not invisible. You're my wife, and I'm done pretending otherwise." She stared at the ring, then at him. Slowly, she held out her left hand. Eli slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, but it fit well enough. Margaret looked at it, turning her hand to catch the light, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said finally. Her voice was thick with emotion. "For tonight. For all of it. Thank you for staying, for giving me a chance to figure out what I actually want." "And what do you want?" He looked at her, really looked at her. Not as the worn woman who'd arrived on Christmas Eve, not as the convenient solution to his problems, but as Margaret, proud and stubborn and stronger than anyone gave her credit for, including him. "I want to try," he said. "Really try. At this. At us." She smiled, tentative and hopeful. "I'd like that." They stood there, the ring binding them in a way the legal papers never had. Outside, the wind picked up, promising another storm. But inside the cabin, something had shifted. Something had begun. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was a foundation, and sometimes that was enough. The morning after the dance, Eli woke to find Margaret already up, standing at the window with her hand raised to catch the early light. She was looking at the ring, turning it slowly on her finger like she was still trying to convince herself it was real. He watched her for a moment before she noticed him, saw the small smile on her face, the way her shoulders had lost some of their perpetual tension. When she turned and caught him looking, color rose in her cheeks. "I didn't mean to wake you," she said. "You didn't." He sat up, running a hand through his hair. Sleep at all? Some. She lowered her hand, self-conscious. I kept thinking about last night. Regret it? No, but I'm worried about what comes next. She was right to be worried. Eli knew Tom Driscoll well enough to know the man wouldn't let last night go. The question was what form his revenge would take. The answer came 3 days later. Eli was in the barn when he heard horses approaching. 2 riders, Tom Driscoll and James Pritchard. Eli straightened, setting down the tool he'd been using to repair a broken harness. Tom dismounted with the slow deliberation of a man who wanted to make sure he was seen. James stayed on his horse, looking uncomfortable. Mercer, Tom said. Got a minute? Depends what you want. Just wanted to talk, man to man. Tom's smile was sharp. About business. Eli's stomach sank. What kind of business? Well, you know I've been buying up grazing rights on the North Range, expanding my operation. I know. Thing is, there's a parcel that connects your land to mine. Would make things a lot easier for me if I could run my cattle through there come spring. Eli knew the parcel Tom was talking about. It was a narrow strip along the creek, good water access, crucial for moving stock. That's my land. I'm aware. That's why I'm here. To make you an offer. Not interested in selling. Didn't say sell. I'm talking about a lease. Let me use it for moving my herds. I'll pay you fair rate. Good money, Mercer. Money you could use, I'd imagine, with a new wife and all. There it was. The edge in Tom's voice when he said new wife. This wasn't about land. This was about the dance. About Eli's public defense of Margaret. About Tom's bruised pride. I said no. Tom's smile didn't waver. You might want to think about it. Could be hard trying to work with folks in town if you're not willing to be neighborly. That a threat? Just an observation. Small towns run on cooperation, Mercer. People help people who help them. But someone who's difficult, who causes problems, who embarrasses his neighbors. He shrugged. Well, folks might decide they don't want to do business with him. James Pritchard shifted in his saddle, looking pained. Tom, maybe we should... Stay out of it, James. Tom kept his eyes on Eli. So, what do you say? We got a deal? Eli wanted to tell him to go to hell. Wanted to throw him off the property, but he thought about what Tom was really saying. If Eli refused, Tom would use his influence to make life difficult. Refuse to sell him supplies. Convince others to do the same. In a town as small as Clearwater, that could be devastating. But if he gave in now, Tom would own him, would know he could be pressured, manipulated, and it would never stop. Get off my land, Eli said quietly. Tom's smile finally faded. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's mine to make. You think you're better than everyone else, don't you? Think standing up for that worn-out woman makes you some kind of hero. But all you've done is shown everyone what a fool you are. She's using you, Mercer. Can't you see that? She latched onto the first man desperate enough to take her, and now she's got you defending her honor like she has any honor left to defend. Eli's hands curled into fists. Last chance, get off my property. Or what? You'll hit me? Tom laughed. Go ahead, give me an excuse to get the sheriff involved. That'll really help your situation. For a long moment they stared at each other. Eli could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, could feel the anger begging to be let loose. But Tom was right about one thing. Hitting him would only make things worse. Come on, Tom, James said quietly. Let's go. Tom took his time mounting his horse. You've got until spring to reconsider. After that, I'll make sure every merchant in town knows you're not worth doing business with. See how well you and your charity case manage then. They rode off, leaving Eli standing in the yard with his anger and a cold dread settling in his gut. He didn't tell Margaret about the visit. Not at first. He told himself it was because he didn't want to worry her, but really it was because he didn't want to see the guilt in her eyes. Didn't want her to think this was her fault. But Margaret wasn't stupid. She noticed his mood, the way he was quieter than usual at dinner. After Sarah went to bed, she confronted him. What happened today? Nothing. Eli, I can tell when you're lying. What happened? He told her. All of it. Tom's offer, his threats, the implications for their future. Margaret listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. I should leave, she said finally. What? If I leave, Tom will have no reason to target you. You can tell people it didn't work out, that I went back east. Things will go back to normal. No. Eli, be reasonable. You can't afford to be blackballed by the whole town. What about Sarah? What about the ranch? I said no. He stood, pacing. You're not leaving. We'll figure something else out. What else is there? You heard what he said. He'll turn everyone against you. Let him try. And when you can't buy supplies, when you can't sell your cattle, when Sarah suffers because of your pride, this isn't about pride. Then what is it about? He stopped pacing, looked at her directly. It's about not letting men like Tom Driscoll decide how I live my life. It's about not giving in to bullies, and it's about not sending you away like you're disposable. But I am disposable. That's the whole point. You can find someone else, someone who won't cause you problems. I don't want someone else. The words hung in the air between them. Margaret stared at him, her eyes wide. You don't mean that, she said. I do. Eli, you barely know me. 3 weeks ago, you were ready to send me back to town. 3 weeks ago, I was an idiot. And yeah, I barely know you. But I know enough. I know you're good to Sarah. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know you're proud and stubborn, and you don't give up even when you should. And I know that if I let Tom Driscoll scare me into sending you away, I'll never forgive myself. Margaret's hands were shaking. She pressed them together, trying to still them. This could destroy you. Or it could work out. We won't know unless we try. You're being foolish. Probably. Sarah deserves better than a father who throws away his livelihood for what? Say it. For a woman he doesn't even love. Maybe not yet. But I could. That's what scares you, isn't it? Not that this will fail, but that it might actually work. She turned away, her shoulders rigid. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Everyone I've ever mattered to has either died or abandoned me. My parents, my husband, everyone. I'm not lucky, Eli. I'm cursed. And you're tying yourself to me out of some misguided sense of honor when you should be protecting yourself and your daughter. You're not cursed. How do you know? Because you're standing here. After everything life threw at you, you're still standing. That's not a curse. That's strength. She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Strength doesn't pay bills. It doesn't stop small-minded men from destroying everything you've built. No, but it helps you build it back. And you're not doing it alone this time. He crossed to her, put his hands on her shoulders. Margaret, look at me. She did, reluctantly. I'm not sending you away. I don't care what Tom does. I don't care what the whole town thinks. You're my wife, and you're staying. Why? Why would you risk everything for me? Because it's not a risk. It's a choice. And it's the first choice I've made in 2 years that feels right. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She tried to wipe them away, embarrassed, but they kept coming. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. How to let someone matter. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. He pulled her into his arms, and after a moment of stiffness, she let herself lean into him. She felt small and fragile, and he wondered how she'd carried so much weight for so long. They stood like that for a while, holding each other in the lamplight. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, something was shifting, settling into place. When Margaret finally pulled away, her eyes were red but clearer. What do we do about Tom? She asked. We weather it. And if things get bad, we adapt. That's not much of a plan. It's the only one I've got. She almost smiled. We're going to fail spectacularly, aren't we? Maybe, but we'll fail together. This time she did smile, small and tentative, but real. I suppose there's something to be said for that. The next few weeks proved Tom wasn't bluffing. Eli went to the general store to buy supplies and found the owner suddenly unable to extend him credit. Times are tight, the man said, not meeting his eyes. Gotta ask for cash up front. Eli had cash, but the message was clear. At the feed store, he was told they were out of the grain he needed. Should have some in next month, the clerk said. Maybe. James Pritchard, who'd always been fair in his dealings, started charging Eli more for blacksmith work. Prices went up, he said, looking uncomfortable. For everyone. Eli knew it was a lie, but he paid it. Word got around. Some people in town seemed sympathetic but unwilling to go against Tom. Others seemed to enjoy Eli's discomfort, like it was entertainment. A few, very few, made a point of being friendlier, as if to show they weren't part of Tom's campaign. Mrs. Fletcher was one of them. She stopped by the ranch one afternoon with a basket of preserves and an invitation to Sunday dinner that she insisted on repeating. "Don't you mind Tom Driscoll," she told Margaret. "He's always been a bully. My Sam says what you did at the dance took real courage." Margaret, unused to kindness, didn't know how to respond. It was Eli who stood up to him. Standing up in public is one thing. Standing up in private, when it's hard, when it costs you, that's different. That takes real strength. Mrs. Fletcher patted Margaret's hand. "You're good for him. Anyone with eyes can see that." After she left, Margaret was quiet. "What are you thinking?" Eli asked. "That I'm not used to people defending me. It feels strange." "Better get used to it." But the pressure was mounting. Eli's supplies were running low. He needed to sell some cattle before spring, but the usual buyer had suddenly found another source. Money was getting tight. Sarah noticed the tension even though they tried to hide it. She stopped asking for things, stopped talking about the future. She watched them with worried eyes and tried to be helpful in ways that broke Eli's heart. One night, after Sarah was asleep, Eli sat at the table trying to figure out how to make their dwindling funds stretch. Margaret sat across from him, mending one of Sarah's dresses. "We need to talk," she said. "If this is about you leaving again—" "It's not. Well, not exactly." She set down her mending. "I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." "Tell me anyway." "There's a woman in town, Mrs. Chen. She runs a laundry. I know who she is. I talked to her last week. She needs help. The work is hard, but it pays." Eli's stomach dropped. "No." "Eli, I said no. You're not working in a laundry." "Why not? I've done it before." "That was before. You're my wife now. You don't need to—" "We need the money. You can't deny that." "We'll manage." "How?" "Tom's made sure you can't do business in town. The money you have won't last through spring. And then what?" "I'll figure something out." "You're being stubborn." "I'm being a husband. I'm not sending you to break your back in a laundry while I sit here doing nothing." "You're not doing nothing. You're running the ranch. And I can help. We're supposed to be partners, remember? That means both of us contribute." "Not like this." She stood frustrated. "Then what's your plan? Because sitting here pretending everything will work out isn't a plan." "I know that." "Then let me help." "I am letting you help. You're running the house, taking care of Sarah." "That's not enough. Not if we're going to survive this." They stared at each other across the table, both angry, both scared. "I can't let you do this," Eli said finally. "You can't stop me. I'll go into town tomorrow and tell Mrs. Chen I'll take the job." "Margaret." "We need the money, Eli. Your pride doesn't change that." She was right, and he hated it. Hated that Tom had put them in this position. Hated that he couldn't provide for his family without his wife having to work herself to exhaustion. "If you do this," he said quietly, "it's temporary, until I can find another buyer for the cattle, another way to bring in money." "Agreed." "And you stop if it's too much. If you get sick, if you're too tired, I'll be fine. Promise me." She met his eyes. "I promise." But the work at the laundry was brutal. Margaret left before dawn and came back after dark, her hands raw and blistered, her face pale with exhaustion. She never complained, but Eli could see what it cost her. Sarah hated it. "Why does Margaret have to work there?" she demanded one night. "Why can't you make Mr. Driscoll stop being mean?" "It's not that simple," Eli said. "It should be. You're bigger than him. You could hit him." "Violence doesn't solve problems." "It might make him stop. Or it might make things worse." Sarah crossed her arms, looking mutinous. "I don't like this. I don't like Margaret being gone all the time. I don't like how tired she is. And I don't like that stupid Tom Driscoll." "I don't like it either." "Then do something." "I'm trying, Sarah." "Try harder." She stormed off to bed, leaving Eli alone with his failure. He'd told Margaret he'd protect her, that they'd face this together. But what good was his protection when she still had to work herself sick just to keep them fed? 3 weeks into Margaret's employment at the laundry, she came home and collapsed. One moment she was walking through the door, the next she was on the floor, unconscious. Eli was there in an instant, checking her pulse, her breathing. She was burning up with fever. "Sarah, get cold water and clean rags," he ordered. "Now!" He carried Margaret to the bed, the main bed, his bed. not Sarah's small room, and started stripping off her wet clothes. Her hands were a mess of blisters and cuts. Her body was so thin he could count her ribs. How had he let it get this bad? Sarah brought the water. Together they worked to bring down her fever, sponging her skin with cool water, forcing small sips between her cracked lips. She was delirious, mumbling things that didn't make sense, reliving something from her past. "Please, I'll work harder," she whispered. "Don't send me away. I have nowhere else to go." "You're not going anywhere," Eli told her, even though she couldn't hear him. "You're staying right here." The fever broke after 2 days, but she was weak, too weak to get out of bed without help. Eli stayed with her, ignoring the ranch work that needed doing. Sarah helped where she could, bringing soup, reading to Margaret from her small collection of books. When Margaret was finally lucid enough to talk, the first thing she said was, "I need to get back to work." "The hell you do." "Mrs. Chen is counting on me." "Mrs. Chen can find someone else. You're done with that place." "But the money, I'll figure something else out." "Eli, we can't afford—" "I don't care. Look at yourself, Margaret. Look at what that place did to you. You nearly killed yourself trying to keep us afloat, and I let it happen. I'm done letting it happen." Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "I'm sorry. I tried to be strong enough." "You were too strong. That's the problem. You should have told me it was too much." "I didn't want to fail you." "You didn't fail anyone. I failed you." He took her blistered hands in his, careful not to hurt her. "I made you a promise. I said you'd have a roof, food, safety. I said you'd matter. And then I let you work yourself sick because I was too proud to—" He couldn't finish. The guilt was choking him. "It's not your fault," Margaret said weakly. "Tom did this. He wanted to hurt you, and he found the best way to do it. Then I'm done letting him win." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. But something. I'm done being passive. I'm done reacting. It's time to take control of this situation." She looked at him with exhausted hope. "Do you have a plan?" "I'm working on it." He did have the beginning of a plan, actually, a risky one. But watching Margaret lying in that bed, seeing what his inaction had cost her, he knew he had to try. The next morning, he left Margaret in Sarah's care and rode to the neighboring county. There was a cattle buyer there, a man named Harrison who'd done business with his father years ago. It was a long shot, but it was all Eli had. Harrison remembered the Mercer name. More importantly, he didn't care about Tom Driscoll's vendetta. "Heard you were having trouble in Clearwater," Harrison said over coffee in his office. "Tom always was a mean son of a gun. Drove my cousin out of business 10 years back." "I need to sell cattle," Eli said bluntly. "Can't do it through normal channels." "How many head?" 20. Good stock." Harrison considered. "I can take them, but you'll have to drive them here yourself. I'm not sending my men into Driscoll territory." "That's fine. What's your price?" They negotiated. Harrison's offer was fair, not generous, but fair. More importantly, it was money, real money that could keep them going. "There's one more thing," Eli said. "I need to start buying supplies from someone Tom doesn't have influence with. You know anyone?" Harrison smiled. "Might be I do. My brother runs a feed store 2 towns over, and there's a general merchant who owes me a favor. Can't promise they'll be close or convenient, but they'll deal with you fair. That's all I need." They shook hands. Eli rode home feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Margaret was sitting up when he got back, looking better but still weak. Sarah was reading to her from a book about a girl and a talking rabbit. "How are you feeling?" Eli asked. "Better, still tired." "Good, because I need to tell you something." He explained about Harrison, about the cattle sale, about the new suppliers. Margaret listened with growing wonder. "You did all this in 1 day?" "Started it, anyway. Still have to drive the cattle to Harrison's place, get everything set up. But it's a way forward. A way that doesn't involve you working yourself to death." "Eli, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just rest. Get better. Let me handle this part." She reached for his hand. "We're really going to be all right, aren't we? We're going to try our damnedest." Sarah, who'd been listening to all of this, piped up. "Does this mean Margaret doesn't have to go back to the laundry?" "That's exactly what it means." "Good. I hated that place." "So did I," Margaret admitted. "Then it's settled." Eli squeezed Margaret's hand. No more laundry, no more breaking yourself for men like Tom Driscoll. We're going to do this our way. The cattle drive to Harrison's place took 3 days. Eli left Sarah and Margaret with enough supplies and strict instructions to keep the doors locked. He hated leaving them, but there was no choice. The drive was hard work, but satisfying. When he delivered the cattle and Harrison counted out the payment, Eli felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. On the way back, he stopped at Harrison's brother's feed store and arranged for regular deliveries. Expensive because of the distance, but manageable. He did the same at the general store. When he finally rode back into his property, exhausted and covered in trail dust, he found Margaret sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket. She looked better, still too thin, still tired, but healing. "You're back," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Did you doubt I would be?"
"A little. Everything seems to go wrong lately." He dismounted, tied up his horse, and joined her on the porch. "Not this time. Everything went right. We've got money, we've got suppliers, and Tom Driscoll can go hang." She laughed, the sound surprising them both. "You're rather pleased with yourself." "I am. Feel like I actually accomplished something for once." "You should be pleased. You found a way through. We found a way through. If you hadn't pushed me, hadn't made me see we needed to try something different, I'd still be sitting here feeling sorry for myself." She leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture that still felt new and uncertain. "We make a good team." "Yeah, we do." They sat like that as the sun set, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Sarah came out to join them, settling on Eli's other side, and they watched the day end together. "Papa?" Sarah said eventually. "Are we going to be okay now? Really okay?" Eli thought about Tom Driscoll, about the challenges still ahead, about all the ways this could still fall apart. But he also thought about Margaret sitting beside him, about the money from the cattle sale, about the path forward he'd found. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said. "I think we are." It wasn't a perfect answer. It wasn't even a certain one. But it was honest, and right now, that was enough. Margaret's recovery was slow, but steady. Each day she grew a little stronger, a little more like herself, or rather, like a version of herself that Eli was only beginning to understand. The woman she might have been before poverty and loss had worn her down to bare survival. She started smiling more. Not the careful, guarded expressions she'd shown when she first arrived, but real smiles that reached her eyes. She laughed at Sarah's jokes, even the terrible ones. She hummed while she worked, old songs from her childhood that she'd forgotten she remembered. And she'd started touching him. Small things. Her hand on his arm when she passed him coffee, her shoulder brushing his when they sat at the table, the way she'd lean into him slightly when they stood together, watching Sarah play in the snow. Nothing improper, nothing presumptuous, but enough to make Eli's heart beat faster. They still hadn't shared a bed as husband and wife. Margaret had moved back to Sarah's small room once she'd recovered enough to walk, and neither of them had suggested otherwise. There was an unspoken agreement between them. They were building something, but they were building it slowly, carefully, making sure the foundation was solid before they added more weight. But Eli was aware, constantly aware, of the shift between them. The way Margaret's eyes would find his across the room. The way she listened when he talked, really listened, like his words mattered. The way she'd started asking his opinion on small things, how to season the stew, whether Sarah was ready for harder arithmetic, if the chickens needed more feed. She was making space for him in her decisions, and he realized with some surprise that he was doing the same. 2 weeks after the cattle drive, as February bled into March and the worst of winter began to loosen its grip, Eli started working on a project in the barn. He didn't tell Margaret what it was, just that he needed a few hours in the evenings to himself. She didn't push, though he could see her curiosity. What he was making was a cradle. A beautiful one, better than anything he'd carved before. He worked the wood with care, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, carving small flowers into the headboard. He didn't know why he was making it. They didn't need a cradle. But his hands seemed to know something his mind hadn't caught up to yet. Sarah discovered him one evening, standing in the barn doorway with her eyes wide. "Is that for a baby?" she asked. Eli's hand stilled on the wood. "Maybe. Someday." "Whose baby?" He looked at his daughter, at her hopeful face, and felt something shift in his chest. "I don't know yet, but if we're lucky, maybe ours." Sarah's face split into the biggest smile he'd seen in 2 years. Really? You and Margaret might have a baby? I said maybe. Don't get ahead of things. But Sarah was already racing back to the cabin, and Eli knew he'd just made a promise he couldn't take back.
When he came inside an hour later, he found Margaret sitting very still at the table, her hands folded in front of her. Sarah was in bed, though he suspected not asleep. "Sarah told you," he said. "She told me you're building a cradle." "I am." "Why?" He sat down across from her. "Because I want to. Because I can picture it. You, me, Sarah, and maybe more. A real family." Margaret's hands tightened on each other. "Eli, I'm 34 years old. I might not be able to have children." "I know. And even if I could, there's no guarantee. I've never been pregnant before. My first husband and I tried for 3 years, and nothing happened." "I know that too. Then why build a cradle? Why give Sarah hope for something that might never happen?" He reached across the table and took her hands in his. "Because hope is better than giving up before we even try. Because Sarah needs something to look forward to. And because whether or not we ever put a baby in that cradle, I want you to know that I'm thinking about the future. Our future. Together." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. "What if I disappoint you? What if you don't?" "I've disappointed everyone else. You haven't disappointed me. Not once. Not even when you showed up looking half dead on Christmas Eve. Not when you collapsed from exhaustion. Not ever. You say that now, and I'll say it tomorrow, and the day after that. Margaret, I'm not your parents. I'm not your first husband. I'm not the people who gave up on you when things got hard. I'm here. I'm staying, and I'm asking you to believe that." She pulled her hands free and pressed them to her face. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Eli moved around the table and pulled her into his arms. She clung to him, crying in a way he suspected she hadn't let herself cry in years. He held her and let her break, because sometimes breaking was the only way to start healing. When the tears finally stopped, she pulled back and looked at him with red, swollen eyes. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of what? Of wanting this too much. Of believing it's real and then having it taken away. Welcome to being human. We're all scared of that." "But you're so certain about everything." He laughed, surprised. "I'm not certain about anything. I'm terrified most of the time. Terrified I'm going to fail Sarah. Terrified I made a mistake bringing you here. Terrified that I'm going to mess this up somehow and lose the best thing that's happened to me in 2 years." "I'm the best thing?" "You and Sarah both. You brought her back to me. Made her laugh again. Made this house feel like a home instead of a tomb. Yeah, you're the best thing." Margaret studied his face like she was trying to memorize it. "I want to believe you." "Then believe me." She took a shaky breath. "Okay, I'll try. That's all I'm asking." They sat together in the quiet cabin, the fire crackling, the wind outside gentler than it had been in months. Something had shifted again, settled into place. They weren't all the way there yet, wherever there was, but they were closer. The next morning, Eli woke to find Margaret already up, but instead of starting breakfast, she was standing at the window looking out at the dawn. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She turned and there was something different in her eyes, a kind of determination he hadn't seen before. "I'm thinking it's time to stop hiding." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm tired of letting Tom Driscoll control our lives. I'm tired of avoiding town because I'm afraid of what people will say. I'm tired of feeling ashamed of who I am." "You have nothing to be ashamed of. I know that. Here." She pressed her hand to her chest. "But knowing it and believing it are different things. And I'm ready to start believing it." Eli felt pride swell in his chest. "What do you want to do?" "I want to go to town. Today. I want to walk down that main street with my head up. I want to buy supplies at whatever store will take our money, and I want everyone to see that I'm not going anywhere." "All right then, let's go to town." Sarah was thrilled at the prospect of a trip to Clearwater. She chattered the whole wagon ride, pointing out the first signs of spring, patches of bare ground where the snow had melted, the faint green of new grass, a bird that might have been a robin. "Spring's coming early this year," Margaret observed. "Maybe," Eli said, "or maybe we're just noticing it more." When they rolled into Clearwater, Eli felt Margaret tense beside him, but she didn't ask to turn back. She sat straighter, her chin lifted, her hands folded calmly in her lap. They went to the general store first, the one that had refused Eli credit. The owner, Mr. Peterson, looked uncomfortable when they walked in. "Mercer," he said. "Mrs. Mercer." "Mr. Peterson," Margaret said pleasantly. "We need supplies." I'm afraid I can't extend credit." "We're paying cash," Eli said, pulling out the money from the cattle sale. "That going to be a problem?" Peterson's eyes went to the cash, then to Margaret, then back to Eli. "No, no problem at all." They bought what they needed, Margaret selecting items with calm efficiency. She smiled at Peterson, thanked him politely, and walked out with her head high. "How did that feel?" Eli asked when they were outside. "Terrifying and wonderful." They made their way down the street, Sarah skipping ahead. People stared, whispered, some looked away, but a few, like Mrs. Fletcher and young Sam, waved and smiled. Tom Driscoll was standing outside the saloon with his usual group. He watched them approach with narrowed eyes. Eli felt Margaret's hand slip into his. It was the first time she'd done that in public, and the gesture wasn't lost on Tom. "Well, well," Tom called out. "The happy couple. Still together, I see." "Still together," Eli confirmed. "Heard you've been doing business outside of town. That true?" "It is. Shame. Could have worked something out if you'd been more reasonable." "I am being reasonable. I'm running my ranch my way with my wife, and I don't need your permission to do it." Tom's face darkened. "You think you're better than everyone else, Mercer. But you're not. You're just a fool who tied himself to damaged goods." Eli felt Margaret's hand tighten on his, felt her start to pull away. He held on. "See, that's where you're wrong, Tom. Margaret's not damaged. She's survived things that would have broken most people. She's worked harder than anyone in this town, including you. She's kind to my daughter, patient with me, and she makes our house a home. So yeah, I did tie myself to her. Best decision I ever made." "She's using you." "No, she's not. But even if she was, even if she'd come here with nothing but the clothes on her back and stayed for the roof and the food, so what? I came out of that deal with a partner, a friend, someone who makes me want to be better. What exactly did I lose?" The small crowd that had gathered was silent. Margaret was staring at him with wide eyes. "You're a fool," Tom said, but there was less conviction in it now. "Maybe, but I'm a happy fool. Can you say the same?" Tom's face went red. "You'll regret this, Mercer. Both of you. We'll take our chances." Eli started to walk away, Margaret still holding his hand. But then he stopped and turned back. "One more thing, Tom. You've spent months trying to destroy me because I embarrassed you at a dance, because I chose my wife over your approval. That's a lot of energy to spend on something that doesn't affect you at all. Makes a man wonder what you're running from, that you need to tear others down to feel big." He didn't wait for a response. He walked away with Margaret and Sarah, leaving Tom Driscoll sputtering in the street. "That was incredible," Margaret breathed when they were out of earshot. "That was necessary." "You didn't have to defend me like that." "Yes, I did, and I'd do it again, every time." Sarah tugged on Margaret's skirt. "Can we get candy? Papa has money now." Margaret laughed, the sound bright and free. "I think we can manage that." They spent the rest of the morning in town, buying supplies, eating lunch at the small restaurant, treating Sarah to peppermint sticks. People watched them, but the nature of the watching had changed. There was less judgment in it, more curiosity. Mrs. Patterson even approached them as they were loading the wagon. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, her voice stiff, "I owe you an apology." Margaret looked surprised. "You do?" "I said some unkind things when you first arrived. Made assumptions I had no right to make. I'm sorry for that." "Thank you," Margaret said carefully. "I appreciate that. And I wanted to invite you to the ladies' social next week, if you're interested." Margaret glanced at Eli. He nodded slightly. "I'd like that," Margaret said. "Thank you." After Mrs. Patterson walked away, Margaret looked dazed. What just happened? You stood up for yourself. People respect that. Is it really that simple? Sometimes. Not always. But sometimes. On the ride home, Sarah fell asleep in the back of the wagon, exhausted from the excitement. Margaret sat close to Eli, closer than she needed to. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you said to Tom. I meant every word." "I know. That's what makes it so powerful." She paused. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" The cradle you're building. His heart started beating faster. What about it?
I want to try. For a baby. I know there's no guarantee it will happen, but I want to try. Eli's throat felt tight. You sure? I'm sure. I want a family with you, a real family, not just an arrangement. We already have a real family, you, me, and Sarah. I know, but I want more. If we can have it, is that selfish? It's human. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. That night, after Sarah was asleep, Margaret came to Eli's room. She stood in the doorway, nervous but resolute. I don't want to sleep alone anymore, she said. Come here. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. Eli could see she was trembling. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for, he said. I know, but I want to. I want to be your wife in all the ways that means. He took her hands. Are you sure? I'm terrified, but yes. Then we'll go slow. And if you need to stop, we stop. No questions asked. She nodded, swallowing hard. What happened between them that night was tender and awkward and real. Margaret cried partway through, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't name. Eli held her and waited until she was ready to continue. When it was over, they lay tangled together, both breathing hard. That was, Margaret started. Imperfect? She laughed, surprised. I was going to say wonderful, even with the crying and the awkwardness. Especially with that. It felt real, like we were really choosing each other. Eli pulled her closer. We are choosing each other, every day. She was quiet for a moment. I love you. The words hung in the air between them. Eli felt them settle into his chest, warm and solid. I love you too, he said, and realized it was true. Somewhere between Christmas Eve and now, somewhere between frustration and understanding, he'd fallen in love with this prickly, proud, stubborn woman. When did you know? She asked. I don't know exactly. Maybe when you collapsed and all I could think was that I couldn't lose you. Maybe before that. What about you? When you gave me your mother's ring, when you chose me over Tom's approval, when you looked at me like I mattered. She turned to face him. No one ever looked at me like that before. Then they were all fools. She kissed him, soft and sweet, and for the first time in 2 years, Eli felt completely at peace. Spring came in earnest after that. The snow melted, revealing the brown earth beneath. Green shoots pushed through the soil. The creek swelled with runoff. Birds returned, filling the air with song. Margaret bloomed along with the landscape. Her cheeks filled out. Her eyes lost that haunted look. She started singing while she worked, old hymns her mother had taught her, rewritten in her mind to remove the religious references she knew, made Eli uncomfortable. She planted a garden, her hands in the dirt, her face bright with concentration. Sarah helped, learning the names of plants, the proper depth for seeds. Eli watched them work together and felt his heart expand. The first Sunday social came, and true to her word, Mrs. Patterson welcomed Margaret warmly. Other women followed her lead. Not all of them, some still sided with Tom Driscoll, still whispered behind their hands. But enough. Margaret made friends. Real friends. Women who invited her to quilting circles, who asked her advice, who treated her like she belonged. Tom, meanwhile, seemed to shrink. Without his campaign against Eli to occupy him, he looked smaller somehow. Meaner, but in a petty way that made people uncomfortable rather than afraid. One afternoon in late April, Eli was working in the barn when Tom rode up, alone this time, without his usual entourage. Mercer, he said, dismounting. Got a minute? Eli set down his tools. What do you want? Tom looked uncomfortable. I came to talk business, real business. I'm listening. That parcel along the creek. I still need access to it, but I'm willing to pay fair price now, more than fair. And I'd like to contract you for some work come fall. I'm expanding my herd and I need good hands. Eli studied him. Why now? Because I was wrong. The words seemed to cost Tom something. About you, about your wife, I let my pride get in the way of good business, and I'm trying to fix that. This isn't an apology. No, it's not. But it's as close as you're going to get. Eli considered. He could refuse, throw Tom's offer back in his face. It would feel good, but it wouldn't be smart. I'll lease you the parcel, he said finally. At market rate, not more than fair. And I'll think about the work. But Tom, if you come at my wife again, if you so much as look at her wrong, we're done. Understand? Tom nodded. Understood. They worked out the details, shook hands, and Tom left. Eli stood in the yard, watching him ride away, and felt like he'd won something important. When he went inside and told Margaret about the deal, she looked troubled. Do you trust him? She asked. Not even a little, but I trust myself. And I trust us. That's enough. She smiled. When did you get so wise? Must be your influence. That night, as they lay in bed, Margaret said, I think I might be pregnant. Eli's heart stopped. What? I'm not certain. It's too early to be certain, but I think I might be. How do you feel about that? Terrified, excited, both at once. He put his hand on her stomach, flat and unchanged. A baby. Maybe. Don't get your hopes up yet. But his hopes were already up, soaring, and there was no calling them back. The weeks that followed were anxious ones. Margaret's monthly courses were late, then didn't come at all. Her breasts became tender. She started feeling sick in the mornings. It might be nothing, she kept saying. My body's been through a lot. It might just be adjusting. But by June, there was no denying it. Margaret was pregnant. Sarah was beside herself with joy. She talked to Margaret's stomach, told the baby stories, planned elaborate futures for her new sibling. What if it's a boy? Eli asked. Then I'll tell him stories too, Sarah said practically. Eli watched his daughter with wonder. She'd grown so much in 6 months. She was louder now, more confident. She laughed freely. She asked for things without fear of being told no. She was becoming the child she should have been all along. Margaret's pregnancy was not easy. She was sick often, tired constantly, but she glowed with it anyway, her hands constantly resting on her growing belly, her smile soft and secret. I never thought this would happen to me, she told Eli one night. I thought I'd missed my chance. You didn't miss anything. You were just waiting for the right time. You really believe that? I do. Everything that happened to you, as terrible as it was, led you here. To us. To this. She was quiet for a long time. Do you think we deserve this? After everything? I think everyone deserves a chance at happiness. We just had to fight harder for ours. Summer passed in a blur of preparations. Eli finished the cradle and moved it into their bedroom. Margaret sewed tiny clothes with hands that had once been raw and blistered but were now healed and strong. Sarah collected soft things, a rabbit's fur, a bird's downy feather, to line the cradle with. The garden flourished. Margaret's cooking improved as she learned what grew well in Wyoming soil. The ranch prospered with Tom's lease payments and the new business connections Eli had made. In August, Mrs. Fletcher threw Margaret a party. Women brought gifts, blankets, bonnets, advice both useful and ridiculous. Margaret sat in the center of it all, glowing, overwhelmed by kindness she'd never expected to receive. You look happy, Mrs. Patterson observed. I am, Margaret said, surprised by how true it was. I really am. The baby came in late October on a cold night that promised the winter ahead. It was a difficult birth. Margaret labored for nearly 20 hours, crying out in pain while Eli held her hand and felt completely useless. But when the baby finally came, a girl with dark hair and a furious cry, it was worth every moment of terror. She's perfect, Margaret whispered, holding the tiny body against her chest. Eli looked at his new daughter, because she was his, as much as Sarah was, and felt tears on his face. What should we name her? He asked. I was thinking Catherine, after your first wife. She gave you Sarah, and Sarah helped save me. It seems right. Eli's throat closed up. You do that? She was important to you. She's part of our story. I want to honor that. Catherine Rose, Eli said, after my first wife and my mother. Catherine Rose Mercer, Margaret agreed. Welcome to the world, little one. Sarah, who'd been waiting anxiously outside, was allowed in to meet her sister. She approached the bed with reverent caution, her eyes huge. She's so small, Sarah whispered. You were this small once, Margaret said. Want to hold her? With careful instruction, Sarah held her new sister, her face a study in concentration and wonder. Hi, Catherine. I'm your big sister. I'm going to teach you everything. How to read, how to find good rocks,
How to tell when Papa's in a mood? You're going to love it here. We have the best family. Eli looked at his family, his 2 daughters, his wife, all safe and healthy, and his, and felt something break open in his chest. It was too big for words, too big for anything except the tears that kept coming. Margaret reached for his hand. "We did it," she said. "We really did it." We did. That winter was the coldest on record, but inside the Mercer cabin, it was warm. Margaret recovered slowly from the birth, cared for by Eli and Sarah and the network of women friends she'd made. Catherine grew fat and healthy, her cries filling the house with noise and life. In February, almost exactly a year after the town dance where everything had changed, there was another social. This time, Eli and Margaret arrived as an established couple. Margaret wore a new dress, not fancy but well-made and clean, sewn by her own hands. The ring on her finger caught the lamplight. People greeted them warmly. Even Tom Driscoll nodded a civil hello, his animosity worn down by time and his own self-interest. When the dancing started, Eli held out his hand to Margaret. "May I?" he asked. She smiled. "You may." They danced, moving together with an ease born of practice and familiarity. Sarah watched from the sidelines, Catherine asleep in Mrs. Fletcher's arms, and clapped when the dance ended. "You look happy," James Pritchard observed when Eli stepped off the floor to get punch. "I am. Different from a year ago." "Everything's different from a year ago." James glanced at Margaret, who was talking with a group of women, laughing at something Mrs. Patterson said. "She's good for you. Good for Sarah, too. She's good for everyone. People just needed time to see it." "Some of us saw it from the start," James said. "We just weren't brave enough to say so." Eli thought about that as he watched his wife across the room. She'd arrived in Clearwater with nothing, no money, no belongings, no hope. She'd been judged, mocked, dismissed, but she'd survived it all and built something beautiful from the wreckage. He'd arrived at that same point with everything he thought mattered: land, reputation, standing in the community. But he'd been drowning in grief, unable to see a way forward. Together, they'd found what neither could have found alone. Not perfection. They fought sometimes, disagreed often, struggled with the same challenges every family faced, but they had each other, and they had something worth fighting for. As spring returned once more, bringing green shoots and warm winds and the promise of new growth, Eli stood on his porch, watching Margaret work in her garden. Catherine was strapped to her back in a sling, sleeping soundly. Sarah was helping, her hands muddy and her face bright. This was what mattered, not status or wealth or what the town thought. This, family, love, the choice to keep choosing each other day after day, even when it was hard. Margaret looked up and caught him watching. She smiled, that real smile that transformed her whole face, and waved. He waved back. In the harsh Wyoming frontier, where survival demanded more than strength, where winter could kill and loneliness could destroy, they'd found something rare. They'd found home, not in a place, but in each other. And that, Eli thought as he walked down to join his family in the garden, was worth everything.